how he is there with us, how he's going to show us to go forward, and how we can live as Catholics, as Christians, showing forth the love and the goodness of God in all things. So buckle up your seatbelts. We're going for a ride for the next hour and a half with Steve Ray. Thank you, Steve. We're ready for you, and God bless you.
Thank you, sister. I should just express my appreciation for all you did and your confidence in me and having me do this. And also for Dina Marie, who from the beginning has been such a good communicator and helped to promote all of this. And I'm very grateful, and thank you for your good work in all of that. Well, we've all seen what's going on in the world, and it's not just happening now, it's been happening for decades. We are losing our Christian heritage in this country. We all know that the founding fathers were biblically oriented to a degree. They weren't Catholic necessarily. There was some that were, and they were men who understood sin, and that they divided our country into 3 divisions of government and so on. And it was all based on Christianity and an understanding, a Christian understanding of man and government. And now we're living in a very different culture, and we're seeing the attempt to bring all that down. And the Christians bear the brunt of it. When you go to other countries, and I see this a lot, especially in Muslim countries, that when Christianity begins to lose its influence, the other forces come in, whether it's Islam or atheism, like in China and North Korea. And always, always the Christians are the first victims. They're always the first to go, because we have a basis to critique any other form of government. Governments like to be the highest authority, but we as Christians have a higher authority by which we can critique the government, and that always has been looked upon and frowned upon. So we're looking at a world very different than when I was growing up even, and I fear for what the world's going to be as my grandchildren grow up and get to be my age. But this whole thing, swimming upstream, how to live a Catholic life in a pagan world, it all began about 8 years ago. This talk developed at that point, and there's no talk that I give that's more in demand right now than this one. And it began with my mom and dad, and I knew they were getting older, and I wrote their life stories for them, and while they're still good memory and so on. And my dad died 7 years ago at 94 years old, and my mother is still alive today at 98 and a half years old. And I remember talking to them as I knew that probably Dad's life was coming to the close. And I asked them a lot of questions, and they said, we don't recognize our country anymore. And that, well, Dad, tell me what you mean by that. What do you mean you don't recognize our country anymore? And he said, well, Steve, he said, when your mom and I got married and started our family, it was very different than it is today. Things have changed so radically, not just in the fact that you remember the old days when there was still horses being pulled around, and when cars came around, a lot has changed. We didn't have television when we were kids, and now there's television and movies. Nobody had iPhones and this kind of thing. It was, not only is it different that way, technologically, but he said the whole moral fabric of our country has changed, the whole legal and moral fabric. And I said, tell me more. He says, well, when we got married, we didn't even know what the word abortion meant. If you'd have said, would you ever consider aborting a child? They would have said, well, what does that mean? They didn't know. They had no idea what it was to abort a child. And they said, and nobody would have dreamed it. Nobody in polite public would ever discuss such a thing. Nobody would ever dream of such a thing as aborting a child in the womb. And now, not only is it acceptable, but it's become enshrined in our laws. Our laws even say that we can abort a baby and kill a baby in its mother's womb. And now we even have senators and congressmen and governors who want to allow the baby to be born, and then the mother can choose to kill it, as long as you keep the baby comfortable first. And they said, and then we found out that not only is it going to be legal, but we have to celebrate it. It's not okay to just ignore it or say, I don't agree with it, but you have to celebrate it. You have to say it's a great thing. And we now find out that we have to pay for it in our taxes. They want to, and I'm so proud of the little sisters of the poor who keep fighting the government and keep fighting this whole mandate where they have to pay for contraceptives and all of these things in their healthcare plan. And they finally won again. But this whole culture is being forced down our throat, where not only is abortion acceptable, but we have to celebrate it. And now we're expected to pay for it, even though we disagree with the killing of an unborn baby, who is a baby, obviously. And then my parents said, and back in our days, there may have been some homosexual activity going on back in the alleyways and so on, but it certainly wasn't anything you'd talk about in polite public. There's certainly no way that this whole gay agenda and lifestyle would be promoted. Maybe it happened with some people that quietly, but now it's coming out with rainbow flags. And not only are we expected to accept it, but we have to celebrate it. Just like abortion is not okay just to be quiet about it. You have to celebrate it and approve of it vocally. And if you don't, then you are a bigot. You are a hater. And my dad says, I don't accept those kind of things. He said the Supreme Court now says that what your mom and I did back when we got married and had children, it says now that two men can get married, and they call that the equivalent of what your mom and I did. And we realize that maybe it's two men and two women now, but once you destroy the definition of marriage, the biblical and Christian, and what all cultures have from the beginning called a marriage. I mean, the arrogance of thinking that we in the 21st century can all of a sudden redefine what marriage is, when all humanity from the beginning has known what marriage is. And now we can change it and say, well, we think it should be this way. What's going to stop 3 men from getting married, or 3 women, or having polygamy? And eventually, who's going to stop a man from marrying his dog? And by the way, that's already being under discussion. So my parents said everything has changed. The worst thing that happened sexually when we grew up was that in the I Love Lucy show, when Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball slept in the same bedroom, even though they were separate beds, but there was a big scandal about that you can't show 2 people in beds together in the same room, even though they were married and in separate beds. It was a scandal. But now look what happens. This is why my parents wouldn't get us a television when we grew up, and why I didn't have it. Because if I were to say, okay, you fathers, you have children, what would you think if 3 very scantily clad women came to the door and they had rainbow flags and all these other things and abortion t-shirts on, and they said they want to entertain your children for an hour? Would you let them come in, and would you step aside and let them entertain your children for an hour? And the father would say, of course not. And yet you walk over and you turn on the television and you let those same people entertain your children while you're off doing something else, and have no idea the damage it's doing to our kids. So my parents said they didn't understand the world. It was changing right before their eyes. They weren't happy about it. And they said, we're glad we're getting old and kind of passing out of this age, because we want to get to heaven to be with the Lord, and we don't want anymore to be confronted by this kind of way our world is going. And I see it moving that way too. Now, anybody who doesn't agree that things have changed, haven't been outside their house very much lately, or haven't watched television or heard the news, because right now, how many of you Christians, Catholics, feel comfortable going out into the marketplace, out into the streets, and telling people you're a Catholic? How many like opposing and say, wait a minute, we disagree with abortion. We disagree with the whole gay mentality and being pushed on us. We disagree with a lot of the moral and immoral things that are taking place today, and the way we're tearing down statues and trying to eradicate our whole history of our country. And now they're going after the churches as well. That's the next step. We already saw last Sunday, somebody drove into a Catholic church and set the church on fire while people were in there worshiping. And they're starting to go after Christian statues and Christian stained glass, and it's only a matter of time. And how many of us don't feel like we are becoming the great minority? We are becoming the silenced minority. We're being told to shut up. You are allowed to keep your religion in your head and in your churches and in your homes, but don't you dare bring your religion and your morality and your Catholicism out into the marketplace or into politics or into business. You keep it out of those. You keep it private. It has nothing to do with being in the public square. And you Catholics just shut up. How many of you don't feel that way? I know people that are very intimidated if anybody finds out they're a Catholic in public. They try to hide it now because it's almost becoming dangerous. We are becoming a despised subculture. We have to realize this. And this is what I've told my kids and what I mean by swimming upstream. We can no longer be Americans in good standing and just stand by. There's no way we can just accept what's going on and approve it by our silence or even by our vocal agreeing with it. Even when our families get together, if we're not all good, solid, faithful Catholics in the tradition, some of them have become very liberal Catholics who think abortion's okay now and this is okay and we should approve of the gay lifestyle. Even in families together, there's great conflicts, even if you're all Catholics, supposedly. And I know this from my own experience over and over again. We're not being accepted. We are being considered the bigots, the haters, those who the rest of this culture is going to turn against, like it has in so many cultures, in so many countries in the past where Christians are persecuted and eventually tried to be eradicated. Look at Turkey, for example. Under Islam, you have, at one time, that was the Holy Roman Empire. It was 100% Catholic. The Hagia Sophia Church, which is in the center of Istanbul today, which used to be called Constantinople, and it was the headquarters, it was the capital of all the world Catholicism at the time, the Holy Roman Empire, and it was the bridge. Turkey, that little section, is both in Europe and in Asia. And when the Muslims took over, there are now only 60,000 Christians left in a country of over 80 million people. And there used to be church steeples on every street corner, and now there are mosques. And Christians are persecuted there. Christians are always the first to be persecuted when other kind of religions and isms take over. And our country is with atheism and secularism, and relativism is taking over, and it's pushing us out. And we're no longer welcome. We are becoming a despised subculture, and I have been telling my children to raise my grandchildren to be martyrs. Now, I wanted to explain now that when my parents talked to me about this and we began to think about it, I said to my wife, do you realize that this is the way it was in the first centuries of Christianity? They had the same experience. They were persecuted. They were tortured. They had everything taken away from them. They were a despised subcultures, not only by the Romans, but also by the Jews. Those first Christians in Israel were considered to be heretics. They were persecuted first by the Jewish people and the Sanhedrins, and then later also by the Romans. And those early Christians lived in a pagan culture. And I said to my wife, there's a timeline here. This is the timeline. It's only got 3 sections. The first is we look at the first 3 centuries of Christianity where they were a despised subculture. They were living in a pagan culture, Greco-Roman. They had many gods. They had what they called polytheism. We have the same thing today. We just call it pluralism. Not that we don't accept other cultures and ways of dressing and living, but we're expected to that. Pluralism means that you have to accept every religion and every ism and everything else as equal. There is a relativity to everything. Pope Benedict XVI said we live today under the tyranny of relativism. Everybody is relative. Everything is relative. What's true for you may not be true for me. I have my own truth, which is ridiculous in and of itself. Everybody balances their checkbook the same way. 2 + 2 is 4. There's not relativity that everything is equal in the world today. A man and a woman being married is not equal to 2 men being married. They can't have children. There's no fruit involved in that. Never has this happened before. So I said to my wife, the early Christians were in a situation that was very Greco-Roman pagan culture. And yet in 300 years, they turned the whole Roman Empire upside down for Jesus Christ. How did they do that? And I said that 300 years, once they Christianized the empire, Then they moved into a period of about 1700 years where the Western world was Christian. It flourished with all of the results of what Christianity brings. Christianity, when it took over the culture, the Greco-Roman culture, and they got rid of all of the pagan gods, and they brought in Jesus Christ, and they built churches all through Europe and even North America, South America. Look at all this wonderful thing. Where do you think universities came from? Universities came from the Catholic Church. Where did medicine and hospitals? Even today, 1/4 of the world's population is only medical care they have is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the one that started the great music and the beautiful art. It started science because Christianity said we have a rational creator who thinks rationally. 2 + 2 is 4. And when he creates something, because he's rational, when we're made in his image also to be rational, we can examine what he made and we can think the creator's thoughts after him. Science came from that. Islam and paganism did not start science. It was Christianity. And where did women become free and equal? It wasn't under Islam, and it wasn't under the Greco-Roman worlds, and it wasn't under any of the other cultures or civilizations. Their freedom and the equality for women came under Christianity because Paul did something very radical in his writings. Paul, he says, not only did he say there's neither female nor male nor female, slave nor free, Greek nor Gentile, meaning that in Christ we're all equal before God, but he did something else very radical because in the Roman Empire and these cultures, women were basically owned by their fathers or their husbands. They were under the complete control of the father or the husband. And the husband had a wife or maybe many wives. In fact, in Rome, a man would usually have a legal wife to have legal children. He'd have concubines to have a lot of other children that weren't going to inherit his wealth. That's why they would be concubines. He didn't want a lot of competition for his legally born son. So he'd have a legal wife or wives, then he'd have concubines, and then he'd have mistresses on the side for his pleasure. There was all kinds of this going on in those ages. And the men basically owned or controlled their wives, whether they're daughters or wives. And Paul dropped an atom bomb, a nuclear explosion on the Roman Empire when he wrote the letter to the First Corinthians chapter 7, where he said, for men and women together in a marriage, woman, you are not to withhold the marital action from your husband. Your husband owns your body, therefore you are not to withhold yourself from him. Everybody already thought that way, but here comes the atom bomb. And you men, do not withhold yourself from your wife, because your wife owns your body. Can you imagine the blast that set off in the Greco-Roman pagan culture, patriarchal culture? You men do not withhold yourself from your wife, because your wife owns your body. It was Christianity that brought the universities and medicine and democracy and freedom and the equality for women and the elimination of slavery over time. Paul's the one that brought that in by saying there's neither slave nor free. He laid the foundation in Christianity for the freedom and the abolition of slavery in the Christian countries, although there were always abuses of that. So Christianity, during that 1700 years after it got out of the pagan culture and became Christianity in the West, brought all of these great blessings. And you and I are still living with much of that same capital today that was earned by them. But about 100 or even a little more years ago, for no good reason, the world started to say, the West I refer to, is that we don't accept this God of the Christians. We don't want somebody to tell us what to do. We don't want to be obedient to a higher power. We are the center of all things. That was the whole enlightenment in Europe, was that man became the center of all things, and God was dead and he was removed. And if he wasn't dead, and if he did exist, he's totally irrelevant. And you watch movies and television today, and there's no mention of God unless it's in a hysterical or humorous comedy making fun of men and priests and God. And even if God does exist, he's something to be laughed at, or he's irrelevant. And in the public schools today where our kids go, they are learning that God is irrelevant, that he's not there. And it's illegal, more illegal in the United States to teach creation and there's a God than it is in Russia and what used to be the Soviet Union. We cannot teach today that there's two views of evolution or God's creation of an intelligent design. That's one of the reasons we homeschooled our kids, because my wife said, I know that when my kids graduate, they will be able to read and they will know that they were made in the image of God and did not crawl out of some muck on a muddy seashore. But our culture is now moving back away from the Christian culture that was established for 1700 years in that timeline. And now they're moving into a new idea and philosophy of atheism, secularism, relativism, and the idea that God doesn't exist. And if he does, he's totally irrelevant. And we're going back to the paganism that our early brothers and sisters had to face at the very beginning. And what I said, they had polytheism, many gods. When you went to the pantheon, pan means all or many, theon means God, theo. Pantheon means all the gods. You would go there and there you could see Zeus and Aphrodite and Apollo and all of the gods there. You could come and worship all of them. The more gods, the better, because the more gods we have, the more powerful we have, and we can choose which gods we want to venerate and worship ourselves. And then when Christians came along, the Roman Empire said, oh, it's okay if you're Christians. Look, there's an extra niche right up there. We'll put Jesus up there and we can all have Jesus along with and the Christians said, no, never. There's only one God. All of your gods are false gods, and behind your gods are demons. It says that in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Psalms, and in the book of Corinthians. And Paul expresses that in Acts chapter 17 when he debates with the Areopagites on Mars Hill in Corinth, where I love taking people and showing them how Paul confronted the pagan culture there. There's a God that you don't know his name, but I'm here to proclaim his name to you. And Paul said he was agitated because of all those gods. His spirit was agitated because he walked through the streets of Athens and all of the gods were there, all these statues and pagan gods. And so this whole paganism, this polytheism, relativism of that past time, anything was okay. Basically, you had Epicureans and Stoics and the cult of Mithra. All of them were okay as long as you worshiped the Roman gods as well, as long as you acknowledged Rome and the gods of Rome. You could have any of these philosophies, or relativism, polytheism, anything. And we are now moving into that same thing today. We're rejecting Christianity for no good reason. No philosophy has come along and been proved to supersede or be better than what we had as Christianity. Christianity is superior. It is the right religion. It is the only true philosophy that explains all of the questions and gives answers. None of the others do. And we're still saying we're going to reject that because we really don't want a God to tell us what to do. We're going right back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve wanted to make the decisions for themselves. Satan said, you can know what God, and we did the Tower of Babel. They were building up the Tower of Babel. They were going to try to reach all the way up into heaven. And our culture, I think, is doing the same thing today. And we're going right back to the paganism of the first century. So I asked the question then, I was with a bishop one time, and he had just written a document about the new evangelization. The new evangelization, of course, is that you now look at countries that were Christianized that are losing it. And now we're going to come with a new evangelization to win them back again. And popes and councils and bishops write all these documents and have these synods. And I always ask a group, how many of you have read all these documents and paid attention and followed all these synods about the new evangelization? And nobody raises their hand. And I said, that's what I thought. And I was with a bishop one time, and I said, he had just written a document about the new evangelization. And I said, Bishop, I don't mean to offend you, but I'm going to tell you that all of that documents are really unnecessary. They may be good stuff. They have good information, but they're really, in a sense, unnecessary because the early Christians confronted a pagan empire and they came up with a blueprint. And within 300 years, they converted the whole pagan Greco-Roman Empire for Jesus Christ. In 300 years, without Twitter and Facebook and news media, and without the ability to even go to church, they turned the world upside down for Jesus Christ. How did these people do it? They didn't have churches because you couldn't build churches yet. It was an illegal religion. You couldn't have a church, and if you did, the Romans would just take it over and turn it into a place to keep their horses. You couldn't go out and have not door-to-door evangelism. You couldn't go out and preach in the street about Jesus Christ. You could, but you'd end up like Peter and Paul being martyred for it. You couldn't be obviously Christian in the midst of all of this, because if you did, many of them lost all their property, their families, and their lives. We've seen the pictures of people being persecuted and martyred. And there's a church in Rome. It's one of my favorites. We always go there for Mass with our groups. Is St. Stefano Rotondo, St. Stephen in the Round. And it's a church that celebrates the martyrs of the first 4 centuries before it was legalized for Christianity. And as you go in, it's the most gory, ghastly church you've ever been in. All the way around there are these colorful murals, like huge banner murals of the most grievous tortures and blood and guts and people with their tongues being ripped out, and all very graphically portrayed. And it's called the Church of St. Stephen, the first martyr. And it's called the Round Church, like in Rome, was always to celebrate victory. And it was the victory of the martyrs. And these people suffered greatly under this. They couldn't have churches. They couldn't go door to door. You couldn't have World Youth Day or Billy Graham crusades like that. You couldn't go to the emperor's palace and picket his palace if you don't agree with his policies. So how did these early Christians, how did they even accomplish this? How were they able to turn a pagan with the military might of Rome and the sacrifices you had to give to the pagan gods you had to do? How could you do that? Live in that culture, being the underdogs, the despised subculture, and how could you eventually turn it into a Christian empire? Who were these early Christians? Paul gives us a hint. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26, he says, "Consider your call, brethren. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak of the world to put to shame the strong." God chose people just like us. Not the kings and the royalty and nobility, not the wealthy billionaires and millionaires. He chose simple people like us. And he gave us the truth through the church. And with only the most meager of tools and instruments, those early Christians went about to present Jesus Christ and the church to the world. How did they do it? They did it quietly. They did it carefully. They did preach about Jesus, but they did it in a careful way. I like to tell the story. Imagine there's a man at a bus stop, and he comes to the bus stop in the morning. He looks around and he sees the man over there, and he walks over and he says, "Good morning, sir. How are your kidneys today?" And the man says, "My kidneys? My kidneys are none of your business. What right do you have to ask me how my kidneys are today? You pervert." And he'll get away, and rightfully so. I'd probably do that too. But now let's say that during the year, you find out that he does have problems. You get to know him. You take care of his family. You make food for their family. You invite them over for Christmas. You give them Christmas gifts, and you take help. You've befriended this family, and a year later, you come to the same bus stop and the same man is standing there, and you walk over and say, "Sir, how are your kidneys today?" And his answer will be, "Oh, well, thank you so much. I have had problems with my kidneys. I so much appreciate you asking and caring about me." And then he'll go on to explain his situation. The same man, the same bus stop, the same question. 2 very different reactions. What is the difference? The first one, I didn't know him. I had no right to go up and ask him about his kidneys. But as we taught in evangelical Protestantism, it was called relational evangelism. You build relationships so that you can evangelize. What I did with the man on the second time, I had built a relationship with him. I had earned the right to be personally involved in his life, to ask him personal questions, to share with him what's important to me. Relational evangelism. And the early Christians in the early church, that's what they did. They made relationships. They earned people's confidence by being generous and kind and gracious and loving. And they would serve people, and they would earn them, bring them into their confidence. And then they would tell them, "I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. That's why I act the way I do." And I'd like to invite you to know Jesus Christ too, and have a personal relationship with him. And we'll get you baptized and we'll take you to our church. We're a despised subculture, but it's a beautiful family. And people started to be attracted to that. They couldn't talk about Jesus so much, but they learned to live disciplined lives. They were caring for other people. They cared for the poor and the disadvantaged, and they had a different view of human life than the culture around them. Life was cheap in Rome. People were there in a utilitarian purpose. They were there to be used by the uppers, by the royalty, by the rich. The rest of the people, half the people in Rome were slaves at the time of the first century. And the people were there to be used. They were utilitarian. Christians came along and said, the Bible tells us, the church teaches us that we're made in the image of God. We have infinite value. We will live for all of eternity. Therefore, no matter how deformed someone is, no matter how young someone is, no matter how old someone is, they are to be treated with the reverence of being made in the image of God. Nobody has the right to take their life from them. They are made in God's image, and in God's eyes, they have an inestimable eternal worth from the moment of conception. There was a letter written in the first century from a man who was in Alexandria, Egypt. His wife was in Rome, and he went to Alexandria to earn money on one of those ships, probably bringing wheat and grain and collecting it and bringing them back on those big cargo merchant ships. And he writes to his wife from Alexandria, and he says this, I am in Alexandria. As soon as we receive our wages, I will send them to you. In the meantime, if by good fortune you give birth, if it's a boy, let it live. But if it's a girl, expose her. This is what the letter said. We still have it in existence today. What does he mean to expose her? That's what the Romans did. They didn't have the kind of abortion techniques and contraceptive that is in the modern world. They would have to let the baby be born usually, and if they didn't want the baby, they would expose it. And they wanted the boys, but not the girls. Realize that in the United States right now, there's a lot of amniocentesis and other tests, and there are being babies eliminated through abortion, not because of there's a deficiency, but because it's a female. That's happening now. It's against the law, but once you allow abortion and you allow testing for things, and you can get rid of Down syndrome babies and so on because they're not going to be perfect, then what's going to stop you from letting a baby who's born that's not perfect and eliminating them? That's all the progress. This is the dominoes that fall. But there's another letter that I found, another comment anyway, when the Romans threw their unwanted newborn babies under the bridges. If you didn't want the baby, you'd take them to the Tiber River with all of the bridges that crossed over the Tiber, and you'd throw the dead baby under the bridges, leaving the infants to be carried away by the wild dogs at night. The Christians waited in the shadows, took the children home and raised them as their own. And this testimony over a period of time won the hearts of many in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire had no value to the human being other than utilitarian purposes to be used, whether it was a woman as a wife. And there are many cultures today that have very similar attitudes. But Christianity, when they saw the babies being thrown under the bridges, they said that child is made in the image of God, and it has inestimable worth. They would stay in the shadows, and when the babies were thrown, they would bring those babies home and raise them as their own. This is the kind of thing that was the evangelization, by living the faith, by living it out in these practical ways that impressed the Roman people, because they had no such philosophy of life. They didn't have the idea that they were of inestimable value. They looked at the Christians and said, what do they have that we don't have? Why do they treat each other? Look how they love one another. We learned this. Those pagans used to look at Christians and look how they loved one another. And then they wanted to become like us because they knew their gods were mythical. They had nothing ultimately to live for. And the Christians gave them, they said, we have something not only worth living for, it's even so true that it's worth dying for. We have something worth dying for. And martyrdom proved it. And the pagans watched the Christians die, we'll get to that in a minute, and said they have something we don't have. They view the human being much differently than we do, and they wanted to have what we had. We have a culture like that today. And if we don't speak out, and if we don't demonstrate our true faith, then we are not going to have the response from the pagans that the early Christians did. Now, there was a God, and I want to talk about this a little bit and give you an idea of what it was like for the early Christians and why they were able to attract such a following, because they would not back down. They understood something was different. Now, during many times in past, there have been gods and divinities and religions that required infant or human sacrifice. They were there during biblical times. Moab and Ammon on the other side of the Jordan River had Chemosh and Moloch, who were these evil gods that required the life of infants as sacrifices. That's happened in other countries in the world. The Jews did it themselves. It says that they all passed their children through the fire in the valley of Gehenna, during the valley of Hinnom, during the times of the kings and the prophets. Even 500 years ago, we may not like this fact, but just south of our border in Mexico, just 500 years ago, Aztecs had human sacrifice. And when they established and they dedicated their big temple in what's Mexico City of today, they dedicated it to their God. And I can't say his name, I won't even try in their language, but his name was the lover of hearts and the drinker of blood. The lover of hearts and the drinker of blood, meaning real hearts and real blood. And on the week that they dedicated that temple, according to the Aztec records, they killed 80,500 human beings to dedicate that temple with their hearts and with their blood. The blood ran down the temples, down to the bottom below, and almost like a flow, a fountain. And there are estimates that 1 out of 4 babies in the Aztec civilization died as human sacrifices. That was only 500 years away from us now. And if you don't think that we are living in a pagan culture, let me just give you an example of one of those gods, Chemosh and Moloch. What would happen is they would have a province or a community, like in Moab or somewhere else. And they would say that we have a God, it's fertility, because everything is about gardens and land and farming, and it's all about agriculture, because that's how they live. And rain was essential. I'm looking out over our backyard right now, and the soybeans are there, and it didn't rain for 2 weeks, and the farmers got desperate. But all of a sudden there was a good rain, and now the soybeans are starting to grow, and I can tell the farmers are going, oh, good, thank God it rained. But if there's no rain, they would pray to the gods, and the gods were the ones who brought the rains. They were fertility gods. And so it would go something like this. On a Saturday, they'd all get together, but the priest, the high priest, would pick out families that had newborn children and said, we're going to need your child for Saturday morning for the great sacrifice to Chemosh and Moloch, and you, and maybe pick 10 or I don't know how many, but they would say, these people will be the heroes of our community because they're giving their infants for the whole of the community so that we all have the prosperity of rain and crops. So on a Saturday, they'd collect together, and Moloch was a big pot-belly stove god, and they had a big hole. If you want to see this kind of thing, it's in my movie, Elijah and Elisha, where I talk about the pagan gods of the biblical times. They would stoke his belly full of wood, and they start him on fire. He's cast iron, big holes up here for his eyes. I get excited here. I'm breathing too fast. And they'd stoke until all of this pot-belly stove god would become red hot, with the iron would be red hot from the fire. And his hands were like this. They were outreached like this with the palms down. And what they would do is they'd bring those babies up, and they would be singing and dancing and chanting. I know this is horrible, but this is real history. This is what happened in many cultures. And they would be singing and dancing. The pipes and the drums are pounding, and and the priest would then say silence, and he'd have the babies come up, and he would dedicate the babies to Moloch, and he'd say, oh, Moloch, we're going to give our best to you, and you give us the rains. And then they would lay the babies in the hands of Moloch, which were red hot. And crush the baby's head, and they'd push them and they'd roll down their arms into that big opening in the belly, and you didn't even hear the baby scream because of the singing and the dancing, and it's very much sexual in nature, and they're praying because it's all about fertility, and when all the babies have been burned, and then you stop and the priest prays. He says, oh, dear God, Moloch, we have now given you our best. We pray that you will give us your best so that we have prosperity, that we have wealth, that we have the prosperity of our land. Isn't that disgusting? That people would do that with their own infants. And yet in America, we still worship the god Moloch and Chemosh and the lover of hearts and the drinker of blood. And we still come to this God, but we now have changed his name. And this God's name now is abortion. And Americans are willing to bring their babies and kill them to the God and offer them to the God abortion so that they can have prosperity. Maybe they don't want to spend the money to have a child. Maybe they don't want the inconvenience of another baby. Maybe they don't want to admit they made a mistake in the back seat of the van 6 months ago. So they're willing to offer their own babies' lives and kill them for their own pleasure, peace of mind, or prosperity. And if you don't think we live in a pagan culture today, just look at that fact alone and ask yourself, how Christian are we anymore? And how long can God tolerate a country that kills its own young and eats its own young, so to speak? How long can he do that? We live in a very pagan culture today in our country, and I am so proud of Catholics for the way that they do not back down. I drove by my brother's house just a week ago, and they built a new Planned Parenthood there, and sure enough, there were Christians, Catholics, walking in front of there with signs. One of them says, "Black babies' lives matter." I'm proud of the Catholics who are willing to speak up. We're fighting against a real bad enemy today, and the whole culture is slipping away from us. Jesus, it's all about martyrdom. It's our giving our lives for something that's the truth. Many died for the faith in those first 300 years. Jesus said, you will be my witnesses. Do you know what that Greek word is? Witnesses? The Greek word is martus. And what English word do you think we get from martus? You will be my martuses, my witnesses, martyr. The Catechism says some of us will be witnesses with our mouths, and others of us will be witnesses with our blood. This is what the early church knew. When I get a chance to talk to seminarians, and when I give talks all over India and the Philippines, which I've done many times, sometimes I'll have 250 seminarians in one room. And I say to these young men, do you realize that when the bishop comes and he puts oil on your forehead and he anoints you with oil, he's also going to paint a bullseye on your chest? You're going to become a target. You're going to become a marked man. It's not going to be easy for a Catholic priest in the coming years. It's not easy now anywhere in the world. And it's getting worse. And you realize that you're going to be a marked man and have a target on your chest when you become a priest. And if any of you are not courageous enough and any of you are afraid, get up and leave now. We don't need cowards in the priesthood. We don't need cowards religious. We need heroic young men and women to serve the Lord in the church. And when I said that, did anybody get up and leave? No, all of those young men stood up and they all clapped and said, we're not going anywhere. We need men like that. The first 30 popes died as martyrs. When they took the chair of Peter, they knew they were getting a bullseye on their chest, and likelihood is they would die in that chair as a martyr for Jesus Christ. For the first 300 years, it's pretty much understood that every martyr, every pope died as a martyr. Tertullian, who was an early Christian, a philosopher who became a Christian, is known for his great Latin theology. He wrote at the end of the 2nd century, and he said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. What did he mean by that? Well, they had the arenas. Do you know that the word arena means sand? They would have the arenas full of sand, usually a white sand, and they would bring the gladiators and the fighters out, and they'd kill them, and the red blood would splatter onto the white sand, and everybody would cheer, kill more, and they'd get frantic. The Christians were brought out, and they died. And as their blood hit the ground, Tertullian said, for every drop of their blood that hits your sand, 10 new Christians will grow up from the seed you just planted. This seems counterintuitive. If I came to all the people there in Beaverton, Oregon, and I said, we're going to start a new club. And it's going to be kind of an exclusive club. But I can pretty much guarantee that within 5 years, you'll be killed for being a member of this club. How many of you are going to join the club? You're going to say, you're a crazy man, Steve Ray. No way are we going to join that club. And yet in Christianity, that's what happened. For the more who died, the more wanted. Why? Because they realized that the Christians had something worth living for. And it was so worth living for, it was even worth dying for, because it would last through all of eternity. There was a meaning to their deaths. St. Augustine wrote this: the earth has been filled with the blood of the martyrs as with seed. And from that seed of their blood has sprung the crops of the church. The martyrs have asserted Christ's cause more effectively when dead than when they were alive. They assert it today. They preach Christ today. Their tongues are silent, but their deeds echo around the world. They were arrested, bound, imprisoned, brought to trial, tortured, burned at the stake, stoned to death, run through with swords, fed to wild beasts, but in all kinds of death they were jeered as worthless, but precious in the sight of the Lord, the death of his holy ones. The Christians believed there was something worth dying for. And Epicureans, one of their funerary epitaphs said, I was not, I was. I am not, I do not care. Some of the philosophies of Rome was everything was fatalistic. Everything was determined. But the Christians said, no, there's meaning to life. I was not, but I was. And now when I am born again, there's no end. Even the word cemetery means sleeping place. The Christians in those first 3 centuries didn't bury people in the ground like the Romans did. They deposited them. Why deposit? Well, what do you do when you make a deposit at a bank? You intend to come back and make a withdrawal. The Christians didn't die. They were asleep. They were deposited in the catacombs because there was going to be a future withdrawal, and they would be raised again. The Romans had no concept of a bodily resurrection. So the Christians had something that was never heard of before, this bodily resurrection. Are you kidding? They believe in that so much that they're willing to give their bodies now and have the rewards later. Justin Martyr, he was an amazing philosopher. He was born in Nablus, which is, it was called Neapolis, Nablus today. It's in the Samaritan area in the Palestinian West Bank. And he was a philosopher, and he wore the philosopher's pallium. He said he studied Plato and Socrates and all of them, and he came to the conclusion that Christianity was true. But how did he come to that conclusion? One of the things he said is that he converted to the Christian faith because he watched the Christians die. He said, how can they die like that? We call them criminals. We call them traitors to our country. We call them atheists. We call them cannibals because they eat the body and the blood. They're cannibals, and they're incestuous because they love one another in those meetings that they have. But we call them the criminals. But how can they die with such nobility? They pray to their God while the lions pounce. They help each other at the last moment. They don't cry out. They don't deny their God. Even if we say you can deny, we'll let you go. They don't. They say, we are Christians. How can they die like that? And it eventually brought him to Christ. I'll give you an example. My time's running out. It always does. An example of what it was like to be there. And I'll imagine it's much more effective when I'm in the room with you. And I say that all of these doors are now being locked and the Roman soldiers have just arrived. And you're back now 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, maybe Ephesus, maybe Corinth. And the doors are being closed around, and the Roman soldiers are there, and they pull their swords, put on their helmets, and they grab their swords, and they surround the room, and you're not going anywhere. And they say that we have heard that some of you are Christians, and you failed to show up at the Zeus festival last month. And that's why the walls of our city have been broken down. And that's why we haven't had any rain. We were wondering why Zeus was punishing us. What did we do wrong? And then we realized it was you Christians. You Christians have dissed Zeus. You failed to show up for his festival. So we have come here now realizing that you all in this room are the ones that have caused this for the whole province. So we've come to rectify it. So what I'm going to do, Lucius, the great centurion, is I'm going to establish right here an altar to Zeus. And all of you will come up to the front and you will offer your incense to Zeus. And you will give him honor. And maybe then he will recant and send the rains. And so I say to all of you, and it's much more effective when we're in the room. It's terrifying. All of you now are going to come forward. And I have my secretary here, and my secretary is going to give you the libellum. The libellum is what you get to says that you are a Roman in good standing. Once you burn incense, that's a form of worship. You just come up here and you burn incense to Zeus. The smoke will go up. Zeus will see, and he will recant from his punishment of us. So then I will give you this certificate that you are a Roman in good standing, and you can go home tonight, and your house will still be there, and your families will still be there, and you will still have your job on Monday morning. So let's go, everybody. I want you all to get up, and we're going to do it kind of like you do with your Eucharistia. You get up and you come row by row. I want you all to come up and burn incense. And nobody comes up. And I say, wait a minute. I am giving you 1 more minute to come up here and burn incense to Zeus. And if you don't, I know how to deal with you. Nobody comes up. Maybe a few do. But then maybe Sister Marie Benedicta says, wait a minute. Are you sure you want to go up there and offer that? Remember, Jesus said that if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. And what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Are you sure you want to go up and burn incense to those pagan gods? And you go sit back down. Well, then what Lucius, I do, I say, okay, I know how to deal with you people. I've had people like you in Ephesus last week, and I know what to do. Brutus, get in here, Brutus. And in walks a 250-pound executioner. He's got a ring in his nose and tattoos all over his body. And he draws his sword. Ha! And he pulls the sword out like this. And he says, now there's a chopping block. He carries it out all covered in dried blood, drops it on the ground over here. And now I, Lucius, say to all of you, you have 5 minutes to decide which line you're going to get into. This line to burn incense to Zeus, or this line to meet the executioner and have your heads cut off by Brutus. Hurrah! Let me ask you a question. If that was you really in a room like that today, back in the first 300 years, which line would you get into this afternoon or this morning? Would you get in this line or would you get in this line? You only have 2 choices. This is what the early Christians experienced. And had they not been champions, you and I wouldn't be here today because they passed on the faith to us. And had they collapsed and not done that, you and I wouldn't be here today. And because they were willing to give their lives, the Romans saw they had something they didn't have. And the Romans flocked into the church also because of the beauty of the singing and the beauty of the liturgy and the beauty of the artwork and the people's souls touched by Jesus Christ. The people, the pagans, were attracted. And in 300 years, Christianity became legalized. And shortly after that, it became the religion of the empire. So us now, we're facing a situation where we're losing our culture, where our culture's been taken away. We're going back to that paganism that we just talked about before. With all the beauties and the graces that have come through Christianity, including freedom. There's never been freedom like we have in our country before. This is the only time there's ever been a country that we are the king. And those that are on the top are really our servants. And the Constitution is a contract that we have made with them. And they had better start following it, by the way. And we're never been in the freedom and the medical and the scientific and the freedom of people like we've had today, but we're beginning to lose it all. We're going to lose our freedom of religion. We're going to lose our freedom of speech. We're going to use our freedoms everywhere that we're having because we haven't protected and preserved them. And we're allowing another philosophy to take over. But what's ended up going to happen is, how are we going to change this other pagan? How are we going to swim upstream to change the pagan culture we're moving into and bring it back to Jesus Christ? That's the question we have to ask. Cardinal George of Chicago, before he died, we always heard three things that he said would happen, but there was really a fourth that he said would happen. He said, I expect myself to die in my bed. I expect my successor to die in prison. Then his successor will die a martyr in the public square. And then his successor will rebuild Christianity in the church and civilization from the dust, because that's what we Catholics have always done. I tell my children I want them to raise my kids to be martyrs. And little Maria Faustina, my granddaughter, says, but Grandpa, why do you want us all to die? I said, Maria Faustina, I don't want you to die, but I do want you to know there's something worth dying for. Don't ever deny Jesus and his church. Don't ever deny the morals and the values and the virtues and the commandments that we're taught by the church, and always stay faithful to our Lord and to Our Lady and to the teaching of the church, because there's nothing else worth living for. And if you deny that, you've denied everything, even eternal life. So if you have to be a martyr to preserve that, then do it, because I'm a selfish grandpa. I intend to get to heaven, and I want all of you there with me. I have two stories I'm going to tell, and I'll be done. I usually do three, but I did one yesterday about the young boy with confirmation, and I pulled that sword and had that helmet I just showed you, and I talked about how we need to train our youth today, how we need to shake them out of their lethargy and their entertainment culture, which is also what the Roman culture did. Remember, they said, give them bread in the circuses and there'll be no problem. This is the same thing. If we keep our people mesmerized and involved with all of the different entertainments and the luxuries and the sex and pornography and who knows what else, keep them all distracted with that, we can take it all away. We need to shake our kids out. That's why I did that with a sword with a boy on confirmation. But I have two more stories to tell, and this will give you the idea of why I call this swimming upstream. My son Jesse, who I challenged him when he was a young boy. I got about 5 minutes left. It looks like we're going to be good here. 5 or 6 minutes left. I remember when he was 16 years old, he said to me, Dad, I think I want to get a ring and I want to get some tattoos. And I said, not in this house, son. It's not going to happen. But I said, why do you want to do that? He said, to be different, Dad. I said, so you're going to be different by being like everyone else? Everybody's getting tattoos and rings and body piercing. I said, so how are you going to be different by doing that? You're just going to be like everybody else, follow the crowd. If you really want to be different and countercultural, if you really want to stand out, then be an authentic Catholic and you'll be noticed. And my son took me up on it. He got his car when he was 16 years old. The first thing he did is went to the lumberyard with his buddies. He had 5 friends that had made a vow to celibacy until they got married. They were going to stay virgins until they got married, and they were going to marry virgins. And he said, these 5 guys, they had something they called a babe alert. When they would go out to an amusement park or do something together on the weekends, if a scantily clad young lady came along with not much clothes on, they'd go, babe alert, and they'd all look away. They said, Dad, we're going to protect each other's eyes from pornography and from unholy things so that when we get married, we're holy men and fathers. I was so proud of my son, but he went to the lumberyard. He bought big pieces of plywood and he made big pro-life signs. He painted and he put them on top of his car. He bought his own car at 16. I taught our kids how to use money and what to do with money. So when he was 16, he went out and bought his own car with his own money that he'd earned. And he painted these big pro-life signs. And we live right in Ann Arbor, which is one of the most liberal cities in the world, university town. And they went driving around the city together, being authentic Catholics, countercultural, with these big pro-life signs. And he said, Dad, everywhere we went, people were screaming at us and they were giving us the finger and yelling at us. And he said, Dad, we rolled down the windows and said, God love you, save the babies. And these 5 boys came back that night and they had such a great feast and celebrating that they were different and they had made a difference. I was so proud of him. Now he's got 8 kids. And they're all the same. And we had a pool when they were a little bit younger. And my son told the kids, in this pool, we can make a whirlpool. If we go around and around in the pool, we can cause the waves to go in a big whirlpool, and the water will go down in the middle and it'll splash out on the sides. And the kid says, yeah, Dad, right, Dad. He said, let's try it. So they got in the pool and they started going around and around. This is hard because the water is standing still. But after a while, it was pretty amazing. The kids couldn't believe it. They got this actual whirlpool going and they loved it. And it was going really fast. And my son said, okay, now let's pretend this is the world and it's telling us how it wants us to live. And we have to go with the flow of the culture. This is America today, and it's telling us we have to accept the gay lifestyle and homosexuality practice. And we have to accept contraception and abortion and euthanasia. And it's trying to tell us we can't. We're going to tear down statues. We're going to be against Christians, and it's going to go around and we're with it. And then what happens, sons and kids, if we turn around and go the other way and we swim upstream and we say, no, we're not going to follow those things, and you start going, and they did. They turned around and they started going the other way against the current. They're swimming upstream now, and the kids got tired. And little Sammy said, I'm tired. I can't go anymore. I've got to quit. And Maria Faustina said, swim, Sammy, swim. You don't want to go to hell. Don't cave into the world, Sammy, swim. And so they kept going, and it was so hard. But what happened? Eventually, the water started going the other way. And Jesse said, if all of us work hard enough and we push hard enough and we don't give up, we can get the culture going back around the right way again. And this is called the new evangelization. And we don't need to come up with new documents about it. We just need to go back and see what the early church did. Follow their blueprint. Be ready to die for it. Really, really believe it. Don't be intimidated by them. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to say it. This is why I wear this everywhere I go. In Muslim countries, at Jewish places, anywhere I go. Hindu, everywhere I've gone, I wear this because I want people to know who I am and what I believe. I'm not going to be a coward about my Christianity, and I want it known. And I want grandkids to do the same. And if we all live this way, guess what? We can together get that thing going back around again, our culture, and we can retrieve it. The last story, because I'm out of time, I have 2 minutes left. I had imagine one time when I was laying in bed thinking about all this, that at the end of time, I'm going to stand before God and give an account of my life. And I thought of it as going something like this. I'm in the waiting room of heaven and I hear my name called, Steve Ray. I come into the waiting room and there's God in front of me. He said, let's see if your name is in the book of life. This is going to happen, by the way. Just read the book of Revelation and see if I'm not telling you the truth. We're going to be standing before God and he's going to open the books. And we need to have our name in the book of life. And he goes through the book. He says, Steve Ray, here's your name. Okay, welcome into the joy of the Lord. And a door opens over on this side. And the smells and the music coming out of that door is unbelievable. And these beautiful creatures come and they start to escort me over to that door to go up the stairs. And right then I hear God call my neighbor, John Smith. And I go to the angels, wait a minute. He just called my neighbor, my friend, John Smith. I want to just wait. Give me a minute. And John Smith comes and stands before God. And God says, John Smith, is your name in the book of life? And he goes through. I'm sorry, John Smith, your name's not in the book of life. And the door opens over on this side. And the smells and the stench and the screaming and howling coming out. And these creatures come out with hooks on their wings and they grab my friend John Smith and start taking him over to that door. And John Smith going over to that door sees me going in that door. And he says, wait a minute, he jerks free. And he says, Steve Ray, why are you going in that door and I'm going in this door? And I said, well, John, it's because I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I had faith and I was baptized and I've been a member of the church. And when I sin, I go to confession and I go to mass every day and my sins are forgiven and I have the body and blood of Christ. And I'm a believer, John. That's why I'm going in this door. And John says, wait a minute. You knew all of that, Steve Ray, and you never told me. You said you were my friend. You came over on the 4th of July. We barbecued together. You sat next to me in the cubicle for 20 years at work. We did all these things together, neighbors, and you never told me about this? And I said, well, John, I'm sorry, but I was trying to be ecumenically sensitive. I was trying to be politically correct. I knew you had your own ideas. I didn't want to push my morality on you. John's going to look at me and the last words I'm going to hear from my friend John's mouth are, what kind of friend are you? Damn you, Steve Ray. and he's going to be taken off to eternal damnation, and I've taken off to eternal glory. And this will happen at the end of time. And me and my family have pledged that no one's going to point to me on the last day and said, you never told me. Even if by wearing this alone, and you sisters, you get to cheat. You wear your habits. Everybody knows what you believe. And if they want to know, they can come and ask you, because you're a living testimony to Jesus Christ, the way you live your life and the commitment you've made. But the rest of us don't. I wear this so that I can, and people come up and ask me what this is. And I always tell them, I'll just tell you one quick story and then I have to quit because my time is up. I was getting on an airplane once. I spend most of my life in airports, except for this year, of course. We usually travel 200,000 miles a year. And I remember one time this young man, 35 years old, came up in the airport and he said, oh, that's beautiful. He said to me, pointing out, it's beautiful. I said, well, thank you very much. I wear it proudly as a Catholic. That's my answer when somebody says they like it. And he says, oh, so you believe it? And I said, oh, yes, I believe it. In fact, I believe it enough to die for it. And he goes, and then he walked away like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. He ended up sitting next to me on the airplane. We call that a divine appointment. He sat next to me on the airplane. And 10 minutes into the flight, I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I say, yes. And he said, you really believe that, don't you? I said, oh, you mean this? He said, yeah, you really believe that, right? I said, I sure do. He says, well, I'm an atheist and I have nothing to believe in. And I would really like to have something to believe in like you. Can you explain to me why I should be a Christian and why it's true? I had him for 2 hours on the plane. I don't know what happened to that man, but I still pray for him. But I want to be there as a witness for Jesus Christ. My wife will tell you wherever we go, somehow I find a way to work it in. My wife, for example, was at the grocery store and an elderly lady came in with come out with her arms full of groceries and couldn't open the door. My wife ran over and said, here, I'll open the door for you. And the lady said, oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. My wife says, oh, you're welcome. We're Catholics and we love to help people. Catholics love to help people, but they don't always tell them why they're helping people. We should let them know it's because I'm a Christian. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I'm a Catholic. And let people know. I'm out of time. But we have a great obligation. And if we all pull together, we can turn the culture back around. But if we don't, we're going right back to the paganism of the last century. And our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will bear the price. God have mercy on us and on our church and on the world. Thank you very much. It's been a joy talking to you.
Thank you, Steve Ray. It is great to have you with us. And boy, we are just grateful to have you be part of our day 1 and day 2 of this event.